"Sir, I need you to step aside now. You don't match the profile of someone who belongs in this boarding area." The words hit like physical blows, loud enough to cut through the ambient noise of Gate D34 at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Officer Gregory Wilson stood with his legs planted wide, one hand resting on his belt near his handcuffs. The other extended toward the well-dressed black man who had been about to scan his first-class boarding pass. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. Passengers in the crowded gate area froze, conversations halting mid-sentence. The gate agent's fingers hovered over her keyboard, her professional smile faltering. And the couple, the targets of this public challenge, stood perfectly still. Their expressions shifting from relaxed anticipation to careful neutrality in the span of a heartbeat. "Is there a problem?" Marcus, Thomas asked, his deep voice, measured, controlled, giving away nothing of the calculations already running behind his eyes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Dr. Zara Thomas placed a gentle hand on her husband's arm. "Marcus," she murmured, her voice just loud enough for him to hear. "It's fine. Let's just understand what the officer needs." Marcus nodded almost imperceptibly. This wasn't their first encounter with unwarranted suspicion. They had a protocol for these moments developed over years of navigating spaces where their presence was questioned simply because of their skin color. Remain calm. Ask clarifying questions. Document everything. Preserve dignity above all. What made today different wasn't the situation. It was the stakes. Zara was due in Washington, D.C. in less than 5 hours to deliver the keynote address at the National Medical Association's annual gala. Her speech on innovative neurological treatments in underserved communities represented the culmination of years of groundbreaking work. And Marcus was carrying something in his laptop bag that couldn't be delayed, something only a handful of people in the country had clearance to transport. "I'll handle it," he whispered back, squeezing her hand once before turning his full attention to Officer Wilson, whose impatience was growing visibly with each passing second. Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport surged with humanity, a constantly shifting river of travelers flowing through its concourses. Announcements echoed overhead, competing with the hum of conversations in dozens of languages and the steady rhythm of rolling suitcases against tile floors. Gate D34 was one of many identical gates lining the concourse. The same blue chairs, the same digital displays, the same counters where gate agents processed a never-ending stream of boarding passes. The Thomases had navigated the morning's travel routine flawlessly until now. Their TSA pre-check status had moved them efficiently through the main security checkpoint. No bags flagged for additional screening, no random selection for the body scanner. They'd stopped for coffee at the upscale cafe near their gate, picked up the latest issues of the New England Journal of Medicine and Cybersecurity Quarterly, and arrived at Gate D34 precisely 45 minutes before their scheduled departure to Reagan National. Around them, the gate area hosted the usual diverse cross-section of travelers. A group of college students in matching university sweatshirts huddled over shared phones. A young mother tried to entertain restless twins while her partner arranged snacks for the flight. Several business travelers in various states of rumpled formality tapped away at laptops or scrolled through phones. An elderly couple shared a crossword puzzle, heads bent together in quiet collaboration. The digital display above the counter showed Delta Flight 1972 to DCA on time, first class, now boarding. The gate agent, whose name tag read Sarah, had just announced boarding for first class, and Diamond Medallion members when Officer Wilson had appeared seemingly from nowhere. Gate D34 was a fishbowl glass walls on 3 sides, the 4th opening to the busy concourse. There was no privacy here, no shelter from public scrutiny. Every word spoken above normal conversation volume carried to dozens of ears. Every gesture played out against the backdrop of bright fluorescent lighting and gleaming white floors. It was a stage set for public performance, and Officer Wilson had just cast the Thomases in roles they never auditioned for. A small girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, watched wide-eyed from her seat near the window, her coloring book forgotten in her lap. Her mother, noticing her daughter's attention shift, followed her gaze to the unfolding scene and drew her child closer, whispering something in her ear. The girl's eyes remained fixed on Zara. The space between the Thomases and Officer Wilson had become a vacuum, drawing the attention of everyone within sight. And in an airport there was always someone watching. Officer Gregory Wilson had joined airport security 22 years ago, back when the job still carried the promise of purpose after 9/11. Now, at 52, the purpose had calcified into routine, and the routine had hardened into resentment. His uniform, pressed to military precision, remained the one aspect of his life he could control completely. This morning had begun badly and deteriorated from there. His ex-wife had called at 5:00 a.m., demanding the alimony payment that he was already 2 weeks late on. His supervisor, Captain Elena Ramirez, had pulled him aside to discuss community engagement metrics and passenger complaint patterns that she claimed showed concerning trends in his interaction style. His coffee had spilled in his car, leaving a stain on his uniform pants that he'd tried to wash out in the men's room sink, resulting in an even more noticeable wet patch. By the time he reached his post at concourse, Wilson was a pressure cooker of frustration looking for a release valve. What Officer Wilson didn't know, what no one in that terminal could have guessed, was that in exactly 9 minutes, everyone present would witness just how catastrophically he had misjudged the situation. In 9 minutes, the power dynamic in that gate would flip so dramatically that careers would end, lives would change, and a movement would begin, all because Gregory Wilson had picked the wrong passengers to profile. "I need to see your boarding pass and ID," Wilson demanded, his tone making it clear this was not a routine check. Marcus produced both items without hesitation, his movements deliberate and calm. "Our flight to Reagan National First Class seats 2A and 2B. Is there a specific concern?" Officer Wilson scanned the documents, his eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of Marcus's federal ID. There was a brief flicker, something like uncertainty before his face hardened again. "This requires additional verification," he said, holding the documents without returning them. "Step aside, please." "May I ask why?" Marcus inquired, still calm but unwavering. "Our boarding passes have been issued, our identifications are in order, and our flight is currently boarding." Wilson's posture stiffened. "Sir, I don't have to explain security protocols to you. Now step aside or I'll be forced to escalate this situation." Zara stepped forward slightly. "Officer Wilson," she said, her voice carrying the same measured authority she used in the operating room. "We're happy to comply with security procedures, but we're also on a tight schedule for professional obligations in Washington. If there's a specific concern with our documentation, we'd appreciate knowing what it is so we can address it efficiently." Wilson's gaze shifted to her, his expression darkening. "Ma'am, I wasn't speaking to you. Please step back and allow me to do my job." The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Someone whispered, "Is he serious right now?" Another voice, "They're clearly first-class passengers." Marcus maintained his composure, but something in his stance changed. A subtle squaring of his shoulders, a slight lift of his chin. "Officer Wilson, I believe we're entitled to know why we're being delayed when other first-class passengers have boarded without additional scrutiny. Is there someone else we can speak with? Perhaps your supervisor." Wilson reached for his radio. "I need backup at Gate D34, he said, eyes never leaving Marcus. "And I need both of you to step away from the boarding area now." His other hand moved to his belt, fingers brushing against his handcuffs in a gesture that was part threat, part preparation. "That won't be necessary," Marcus said, his voice still level, but with an edge of steel now. "We are not a security threat. We are legitimate passengers, and we have every right to board our flight." "That's not your decision to make," Wilson replied, unhooking the handcuffs from his belt. "Now put your hands where I can see them, both of you." The atmosphere in Gate D34 had transformed completely. Every conversation had stopped. Phones were raised, recording. The young girl by the window pressed closer to her mother, eyes wide with apprehension and confusion. And still the Thomases stood their ground, dignity intact, facing a situation they had encountered in various forms throughout their lives, but never with such high stakes or such a public audience. At 36, Marcus Thomas carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who navigated high-level security clearances and classified information daily. His charcoal gray suit was impeccably tailored. His burgundy tie a perfect complement to the pocket square that matched his wife's blouse. A small detail they always coordinated when traveling together, one of their many private traditions. His journey to this moment had begun at Howard University, where he'd graduated summa cum laude with dual degrees in computer science and international relations. Even then, his professors had noted his unique ability to see connections between seemingly disparate systems, to understand both the technical architecture of security networks and the human psychology that could compromise them. After a brief stint at a private cybersecurity firm, Marcus had been recruited by Homeland Security, where his talent for identifying vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure had quickly marked him for advancement. Within 5 years, he was leading specialized teams focused on protecting sensitive data networks against foreign intrusion attempts. By year 7, he had obtained diplomatic security clearance, allowing him to serve as liaison between U.S. intelligence agencies and their international counterparts. What set Marcus apart wasn't just his technical brilliance, but his emotional intelligence, his ability to navigate the complex human terrain of international security cooperation with the same dexterity he applied to code. In meetings with foreign officials, he was often the calming presence, the bridge builder, the one who could translate technical requirements into human terms that fostered trust rather than defensiveness. Security isn't just about stronger walls, he often told his teams. It's about better conversations. This philosophy had earned him both admirers and critics within the intelligence community. Some valued his collaborative approach, others viewed it as soft, preferring more aggressive stances on information sharing. But over time, his results spoke for themselves. The networks under his protection had experienced 78% fewer breaches than comparable systems, and his diplomatic relationships had facilitated intelligence exchanges that prevented at least 3 major cyber attacks on U.S. infrastructure. What few people knew what wasn't in his official file was how much Marcus's approach had been shaped by a lifetime of navigating spaces where his presence was questioned, where he had to prove his right to exist in environments from elite academic institutions to executive boardrooms. He had learned early that showing anger, no matter how justified, would only reinforce others' biases, that maintaining dignity in the face of disrespect was sometimes its own form of resistance. Dr. Zara Thomas, at 34, was the youngest neurosurgeon ever to lead the innovative neural pathway research program at Atlanta Memorial Hospital. Her tailored navy pantsuit spoke of success without flash, her natural hair styled in a sleek professional updo. Only the slight tightening around her eyes betrayed any reaction to Officer Wilson's words. Zara's brilliance had been evident from childhood, but her path to medicine had been far from smooth. As the daughter of Jamaican immigrants, her father a high school mathematics teacher, her mother a nurse she had grown up with, both high expectations and a clear understanding of the additional hurdles she would face as a black woman pursuing a medical career. Her undergraduate years at Howard had been marked by excellence, but also by frequent dismissal from professors who underestimated her, by study partners who seemed surprised by her insights, by advisors who suggested more achievable career paths than neurosurgery. Each slight had only strengthened her resolve. "Your credentials need to be twice as impressive," her mother had told her. "Your preparation 3 times as thorough. your composure unshakable. Medical school at Johns Hopkins had been a pressure cooker of stress and isolation. As one of only 3 black women in her class, Zara had often felt the weight of representation, the unspoken expectation that her performance would either reinforce or disprove stereotypes about her entire race and gender. She had excelled nonetheless, graduating at the top of her class and securing the competitive neurosurgery residency that had brought her back to Atlanta. Her research focused on neural pathway regeneration in trauma patients' work that combined innovative surgical techniques with groundbreaking applications of electrical stimulation to help the brain create new connections after injury. Her methods had already reduced recovery time for certain types of brain injuries by nearly 40%, and her most recent paper in the New England Journal of Medicine had been hailed as a paradigm shift in post-trauma neural care. What made Zara's approach unique was her insistence on inclusivity in both research and treatment. While many medical advances were tested primarily on white male subjects, Zara had deliberately designed her studies to include diverse patient populations, revealing critical differences in neural response patterns across different genetic backgrounds. Differences that affected treatment efficacy in ways previous researchers had missed. Medical science can only be as good as the diversity of its data, she often stated in her lectures. When we exclude populations from our research, we encode inequity into our treatments. This commitment to equity had made her both a rising star in neuroscience and a somewhat controversial figure in more traditional medical circles, someone who challenged not just scientific orthodoxy, but the institutional structures that determined which patients received cutting-edge care and which were left behind. They had met 12 years ago at Howard University, she in medical school, he, completing his master's in cybersecurity. Their first date had been coffee that turned into dinner, that turned into a sunrise walk through the National Mall. They'd married 6 years ago in a ceremony that blended their family traditions, his Southern Baptist roots, her Jamaican heritage. Their partnership was built on mutual ambition, shared values, and the unspoken understanding that came from similar childhoods, where excellence wasn't just encouraged, but expected. They moved through the world as a team, each supporting the other's professional journey, while building a life that honored both their individual passions and their collective goals. At home, they were simply Marcus and Zara. She curled on the couch with medical journals, he tinkering with new security protocols, both of them debating everything from neurobiology to international policy, with the same intensity and respect. They challenged each other intellectually and supported each other emotionally, especially through the inevitable moments when the world reminded them that their accomplishments didn't shield them from bias. Their roles often shifted and blended. Sometimes Zara was the protective one, fielding uncomfortable questions at Marcus's work functions about how he had gotten his position. Sometimes Marcus was the emotional anchor when Zara returned home frustrated after having her medical expertise questioned by patients who assumed she was a nurse. They'd learned to dance between these identities seamlessly, each filling in the gaps for the other. "We're each other's safe harbor," Marcus often said, "and each other's lighthouse." The morning of the incident had begun like many others in the Thomas household. The alarm had chimed softly at 4:30 a.m., though Zara was already awake, sleep having proven elusive, as it often did before big presentations. She'd slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Marcus, and padded to their home office, where her notes for the keynote speech were spread across the desk. The house was quiet, the pre-dawn darkness holding everything in suspension. Zara had spent an hour reviewing her slides, making small adjustments to her talking points, rehearsing the transitions between her key arguments. The speech represented years of work, not just her surgical innovations, but her advocacy for equitable access to advanced neurological care. When Marcus joined her at 5:30, he carried 2 steaming mugs of coffee, hers with the precise amount of almond milk she preferred. Nervous, he'd asked, setting her mug on a coaster beside her laptop. Not about the speech, she admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. About the reception? The panel includes Dr. Harrison from Princeton. Marcus nodded in understanding. They both knew Harrison's reputation brilliant, influential, and notoriously dismissive of research that emphasized social factors in medical outcomes. He'll be confronted with data he can't dismiss, Marcus said simply. And you'll be brilliant, as always. They moved through their morning routine with practiced efficiency. Shower breakfast, final packing checks. As Marcus carefully placed his laptop into its secure case, Zara noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. Important cargo today? She asked quietly, though they were alone in their home. Marcus nodded. The neural interface data. The combined application has finally been approved for testing. Zara inhaled sharply. They rarely discussed the intersection of their work explicitly, the classified project that combined her neural pathway research with national security applications, a system that could potentially help patients with severe brain injuries while also providing new capabilities for secure communications in diplomatic and intelligence settings. That's why Agent Foster will meet us in D.C. Marcus added, securing the specialized encryption key in his inner jacket pocket. No wonder you've been distracted all week, Zara said, understanding now the weight of responsibility he was carrying. Just focused, he corrected with a small smile. Like you before surgery. As they'd gathered their luggage and headed for the door, Zara had paused briefly in their foyer, looking at the framed photo from their wedding day, both of them radiant, surrounded by family and friends, Marcus's grandmother standing proudly between them. She'd be proud, Marcus said, following her gaze. Of both of us. Zara nodded, touching the frame lightly. She always said, "Walk in this world like you belong in every room." And we do, Marcus replied, opening the door. Let's go change some lives. The drive to the airport had been smooth, their conversation shifting between Zara's presentation points and Marcus's upcoming security conference. Neither had any reason to suspect that this day would be different from the dozens of business trips they'd taken before, that instead of changing lives through medical research or cybersecurity innovations, they would catalyze a different kind of change, one that would begin in just under 9 minutes at Gate D34. For the Thomas couple, air travel had long ago become routine. Their status as frequent flyers had earned them the perks that made the process smoother. Priority check-in, expedited security, first-class seating. They knew which security lines moved fastest at different times of day, which airport restaurants served decent coffee, which gates had the best workspace options for last-minute preparation. What never became routine, however, were the occasional sideways glances when they settled into first-class seats. The slightly surprised expressions from flight attendants who hadn't expected them, the subtle double checks of their boarding passes that their white counterparts rarely experienced. Over the years, they had accumulated these small indignities like frequent flyer miles, counting them not in anger, but as data points that informed their navigation of the world. There was the time a flight attendant had asked Marcus if he was in the right seat, despite having just scanned his boarding pass. The incident when another passenger had asked Zara to help with the overhead bins, assuming she was a crew member rather than a fellow traveler. The occasions when gate agents spoke to white passengers with Mr. or Ms., but addressed them by their first names. None of these incidents had escalated to the confrontation they now faced at Gate D34, but each had prepared them in its way for this moment, had helped shape the protocol they now followed. Stay calm, document everything, preserve dignity. What Officer Wilson couldn't see, couldn't begin to understand, was that he wasn't facing two individuals, but the culmination of generations of resilience. The weight of ancestry that gave them the strength to stand firm, even as his hand moved toward his handcuffs. The handcuffs gleamed under the fluorescent lights as Officer Wilson unhooked them from his belt. The metallic click as they opened seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence that had fallen over Gate D34. "So place your hands behind your back," Wilson instructed, his voice carrying the artificial calm of someone who believes they're following protocol while everything around them suggests otherwise. Marcus remained perfectly still, his expression composed but resolute. "Officer Wilson, I will not be handcuffed. I have presented valid identification and a legitimate boarding pass. You have yet to articulate any reasonable suspicion that would justify detention." The precision of his language was deliberate, a careful invocation of legal standards that Wilson was violating. Around them, at least 5 passengers now had phones raised, recording the encounter. The gate agent looked desperately toward her supervisor's office, clearly torn between protocol and the obvious wrongness of what was unfolding. "This is your final warning," Wilson said, stepping closer. "Interfering with security procedures is grounds for arrest." Zara moved slightly, positioning herself beside rather than behind her husband. Her doctor's training had taught her to assess situations quickly, to remain steady in crisis, to find the path of least harm. She could see the dangerous momentum building, Wilson too committed to back down, the crowd growing more visibly disturbed. Marcus standing his ground with quiet dignity. "Officer," she said, her voice carrying the calm authority that commanded operating rooms, "my husband and I are not resisting security procedures. We are questioning the selective application of additional screening that other passengers in this boarding group haven't been subjected to. If you could explain the specific concern, ma'am, step back now." Wilson interrupted, his focus still on Marcus. "Sir, hands behind your back, or I will consider this active resistance." A woman in a business suit, standing nearby, spoke up. "They're just trying to board their flight like everyone else. This is ridiculous." Wilson's head snapped toward her. "Ma'am, do not interfere with official security operations. What security operation someone else called out?" They showed their IDs. The situation was escalating rapidly, the public nature of the confrontation creating a pressure cooker effect. Wilson's hand closed around one of Marcus's wrists, attempting to pull it behind his back. Marcus didn't resist violently, but he didn't comply either, maintaining his position with the immovable calm of someone who knows they are in the right. "Officer Wilson," he said, his voice still measured despite the hand gripping his wrist. "I am respectfully declining to be handcuffed without reasonable cause. I am requesting your supervisor immediately." A ripple went through the crowd as 2 more security officers approached from the concourse. Officer Miguel Rodriguez, a younger Hispanic man, and Officer Trevor Bennett, a white officer in his 40s. They moved with the cautious efficiency of people responding to a potential incident. Hands near their belts, eyes scanning the scene. "What's the situation?" Officer Bennett asked, taking in the tableau of Wilson attempting to handcuff a well-dressed man, while an equally professional woman stood nearby the growing crowd of onlookers with phones raised. Non-compliant passenger Wilson responded tersely, refusing additional screening and resisting security directives. Officer Rodriguez's eyes flickered to the boarding passes still visible in Marcus's hand, then to Zara's expression of controlled concern, then back to Wilson. Something in his posture suggested hesitation. "Sir, Ma'am," Bennett addressed the Thomases, "for everyone's safety. Please comply with security directives and we can sort this out in a more private setting." Zara met his gaze directly. "Officer Bennett," she said. Reading his name tag, "My husband and I have complied with all standard security procedures. We presented valid identification and boarding passes. No explanation has been provided for this additional detention. We are medical and cybersecurity professionals on our way to Washington for work obligations. We're not seeking confrontation, we simply want to board our flight like the other first-class passengers who have already done so without incident." Her calm recitation of facts created a stark contrast with Wilson's increasingly agitated demeanor. Rodriguez and Bennett exchanged a quick glance that suggested growing uncertainty. Throughout the confrontation, the young girl by the window had not looked away. Now perhaps 8 years old, with dark skin and tightly coiled hair pulled into neat puffs on either side of her head, she watched Zara with an intensity that suggested she was absorbing every detail of how a black woman could stand with such dignity in the face of unfair treatment. Her mother, noticing this focus, whispered something in her ear, but the girl simply nodded without shifting her gaze. Marcus, still maintaining his position, while Wilson gripped his wrist, spoke again. "Officers, I believe we can resolve this situation professionally. I have federal clearance and am traveling on official business. If you contact your supervisor, we can verify my status without further disruption." Wilson's grip tightened. "Federal clearance doesn't exempt you from security procedures." "Of course not," Marcus agreed. "But it does entitle me to appropriate protocols for verifying that clearance, which do not include public detention without cause." Bennett seemed to register something in Marcus's tone, the confidence of someone familiar with security protocols, rather than attempting to bluff. "What agency?" he asked directly. Before Marcus could answer, Wilson cut in. "That's not relevant to the current situation. He refused direct orders and needs to be detained for further questioning." Rodriguez, who had been scanning the crowd, the increasingly uncomfortable gate agent, and the composed couple at the center of it all, finally spoke. "Maybe we should call the supervisor." Wilson turned to him, frustration evident. "I don't need supervision to enforce basic compliance." Greg Bennett said in a lower voice, "There's a lot of cameras here. Let's just follow procedure." The implication was clear. This was becoming a public relations situation as much as a security one. Wilson's jaw tightened, but he didn't release his grip on Marcus's wrist. Zara, recognizing the officer's uncertainty as a potential opening, spoke again. "Officers, we understand you're doing your jobs. We respect the importance of airport security. All we're asking is for equal application of screening procedures and a clear explanation of any concerns. If there's something specific about our documentation that requires verification, we're happy to cooperate with appropriate processes." Her reasonable tone further highlighted the contrast between their behavior and Wilson's escalating response. More passengers had gathered at the edges of the scene, some looking uncomfortable, others openly recording, a few making phone calls, possibly to the airline's customer service, or to share what they were witnessing. The gate agent, unable to remain silent any longer, approached Officer Bennett. "Sir, these passengers have confirmed first-class reservations, and their boarding passes were properly issued. The flight is scheduled to depart in 20 minutes. Bennett nodded, then turned to Wilson. "Greg, let's move this to the security office if additional verification is needed." Wilson's face flushed with a combination of frustration and embarrassment. The situation had evolved beyond his control, but backing down now would be an admission of error. Instead, he tightened his grip on the handcuffs. "Sir, you're coming with us for additional screening. This is non-negotiable at this point." Marcus looked at Zara, a silent communication passing between them. They had reached a decision point. Continued resistance might escalate to a physical confrontation. Compliance would mean missing their flight, and the critical obligations waiting in D.C. Either way, something important would be compromised. In that moment of suspended tension, Marcus made a subtle movement with his free hand, reaching not in resistance, but toward the inside pocket of his jacket. "I'm going to retrieve my federal identification," he stated clearly, his movements slow and deliberate. "I am not reaching for a weapon." Wilson tensed. "Keep your hands where I can see them." But Marcus continued the careful movement, extracting a small leather case from his inner pocket. He held it up so that all three officers could see it, then flipped it open to reveal a distinctive federal ID badge. "My name is Marcus Thomas. I have Level 4 security clearance with diplomatic protocol extensions. I am currently transporting sensitive materials related to national security. You can verify this information by contacting the number on the back of this credential." The revelation hung in the air. Bennett stepped closer to examine the ID, his expression shifting from skepticism to concern. Rodriguez glanced between the ID and Wilson, who still maintained his grip on Marcus's wrist despite this new information. "This needs to be verified." Wilson insisted, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Agreed, Marcus said calmly. And there are established protocols for that verification that don't involve public detention. What no one in the gate area yet realized was that Marcus had already set those protocols in motion, that even before displaying his credentials, he had pressed a specific sequence on his phone that activated an emergency response system, and that in exactly 3 minutes, the power dynamics in Gate D34 would shift dramatically. For now, the standoff continued. Wilson unwilling to release Marcus despite the federal eyed maintained his grip. Bennett and Rodriguez, increasingly uncertain, waited for guidance from a supervisor who had not yet arrived, and the Thomases stood their ground with the steady resolve of people who had prepared all their lives for moments when their presence would be challenged, never expecting it would happen, while carrying classified materials bound for Washington, D.C. The 9-minute mark was approaching, and with it, everything would change. As Wilson attempted to guide Marcus toward the exit, still gripping his arm despite the federal identification, Marcus glanced at his watch. 8 minutes had elapsed since the initial confrontation. With his free hand, he pressed a button on his phone, activating the secure line that had been open since his first discreet notification. "Officer Wilson," he said calmly, "in the interest of national security and to avoid further complications, I should inform you that a response team has been notified and will arrive momentarily. I suggest we all remain here until they do." Wilson scoffed. "Is that supposed to be a threat?" "You're not dictating security procedures here. It's not a threat," Marcus replied evenly. "It's protocol for the materials I'm transporting." Zara maintained her position beside her husband, her expression composed despite the tension radiating through the gate area. The crowd had grown with curious travelers pausing to observe the confrontation. Phones remained raised, capturing every word, every gesture. At precisely the 9-minute mark, the atmosphere in Gate D34 shifted. 3 individuals in plain clothes entered the area with purposeful strides, 2 men and a woman, all wearing discreet earpieces and carrying themselves with unmistakable authority. The woman led slightly, her dark suit impeccably tailored, her expression focused and severe. "Federal agents," she announced, displaying a badge that caused Officer Bennett's eyes to widen. "I'm Senior Agent Diana Foster, United States Secret Service. Release Mr. Thomas immediately." Wilson froze, his hand still gripping Marcus's wrist. Handcuffs dangling forgotten. "Secret Service, now Officer Wilson." Agent Foster repeated her tone, leaving no room for hesitation. The atmosphere in the gate had transformed completely. Whispers rippled through the crowd as Wilson slowly released his grip on Marcus's arm, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Agent Foster approached the Thomases, positioning herself slightly between them and the security officers. "Dr. and Mr. Thomas. Are you both all right?" "We're fine, Agent Foster," Marcus replied with the familiarity of someone who had worked with her before. Foster turned to face the 3 airport security officers, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes sharp with controlled anger. "Officers, I need your badge numbers and supervisor's contact information immediately. Mr. Thomas is transporting sensitive materials under diplomatic protocol protection. His identity and authorization have been fully vetted and verified by multiple federal agencies." Wilson had gone pale, the implications of his actions beginning to sink in. "We were just following standard security protocols for suspicious." "Suspicious? What exactly?" Foster cut him off. "A respected neurosurgeon and a federal cybersecurity expert traveling first class with proper identification. Please explain which security protocol calls for handcuffing passengers who have presented valid documentation." Bennett stepped forward. "Agent Foster, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. We were responding to Officer Wilson's call for backup, and a misunderstanding that was escalating to an unlawful detention of federal agents on official business." one of the male agents interjected. That's a serious breach of both protocol and federal law. The crowd of onlookers had grown silent, watching the dramatic power shift unfold before them. The young girl who had been observing since the beginning now leaned forward in her seat, her eyes wide as she witnessed justice arriving in real time. The gate agent approached tentatively. Agents, the flight is scheduled to depart in 15 minutes. Should we hold boarding? No, Foster replied decisively. Dr. and Mr. Thomas will board as planned. We'll be accompanying them to Washington. She turned back to the security officers. Your supervisor will be contacted directly by our agency. I expect full cooperation with the investigation that will follow. Wilson, finally finding his voice again, attempted to salvage some authority. We have security protocols that Officer Wilson Foster interrupted sharply. You've demonstrated a concerning lack of judgment that has compromised not only these passengers' dignity, but potentially a matter of national security. I suggest you say nothing further until your legal representation is present. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Wilson took an involuntary step back, the full weight of his miscalculation evident in his posture. Marcus turned to Zara. A silent exchange passing between them. Relief mingled with the familiar weariness of having to prove once again that they belonged exactly where they were. He then addressed Agent Foster. Diana, thank you for the quick response. I believe we can still make our scheduled arrival if we board now. Foster nodded. Of course. Agent Reynolds and Agent Patel will assist with your luggage. I need a brief word with the airport director before we depart. As Marcus and Zara prepared to finally board their flight, murmurs spread through the crowd. Some passengers looked embarrassed, others outraged on the couple's behalf. A few approached to express support or apologize for not speaking up sooner. The gate agent, clearly mortified by what had transpired, hurried to process their boarding. Dr. and Mr. Thomas, I am so deeply sorry for this experience. On behalf of the airline, please accept my sincere apologies. Zara offered a gracious nod, but her eyes reflected the cumulative weight of such experiences, each one requiring forgiveness, each one extracting an emotional toll regardless of how professionally it was handled. As they finally moved toward the jetway, the young girl who had been watching broke away from her mother and approached Zara. Excuse me, she said, her voice small but determined. Are you a real doctor? Zara knelt to the child's eye level, her professional composure softening into a genuine smile. Yes, I am. I'm a neurosurgeon, a doctor who helps fix people's brains when they're injured or sick. The girl's eyes widened. I want to be a doctor too, but Tommy in my class said girls can't be brain doctors. Tommy is wrong, Zara replied simply. You can be anything you work hard to become. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The girl nodded solemnly, absorbing this truth from a woman who had just demonstrated extraordinary dignity under pressure. Her mother approached, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Thank you, Dr. Thomas, she said quietly, for everything you just showed my daughter. As the Thomases finally boarded their flight accompanied by the Secret Service agents, the impact of what had transpired at Gate D34 was already rippling outward. Videos were being uploaded, messages were being sent, and conversations were beginning about what had really happened in those 9 minutes and what it revealed about who was questioned in public spaces and who moved through the world unchallenged. Officer Wilson stood motionless near the gate counter, watching as the couple he had attempted to handcuff boarded first class with a federal escort. His mind raced through the potential consequences, disciplinary action, possible termination, the videos that were undoubtedly already circulating online. In 9 minutes, he had not only derailed his career, but had become an unwitting catalyst for a conversation much larger than himself. What he couldn't know, what none of them could predict in that moment, was how those 9 minutes at Gate D34 would eventually transform not just airport security procedures, but the broader landscape of public transportation equity, all because he had made the catastrophic error of assuming that Marcus and Zara Thomas didn't belong in first class. The jet bridge hummed with tension as Marcus and Zara Thomas finally boarded their flight to Washington, D.C. Secret Service agents flanking them like an honor guard. Behind them, the commotion at Gate D34 continued to unfold, a rapidly expanding ripple effect from the confrontation that had just transpired. Airport Director Catherine Rivera arrived at the gate barely 2 minutes after the Thomases had boarded Security Chief Jackson Bennett hurrying alongside her. At 56, Rivera had navigated numerous crises during her tenure. Weather emergencies, security threats, labor disputes, but the text message she'd received from her assistant had sent her rushing across the terminal with unprecedented urgency. Secret Service intervention at D34. Videos already on social. What happened here, she demanded. Taking in the scene, Officer Wilson standing rigid and ashen-faced. Passengers still clustered in groups with phones raised. The gate agent looking simultaneously relieved that the Thomases had boarded and terrified of the administrative fallout. Security Chief Bennett, a 30-year veteran of airport operations with silver hair and the weathered face of someone who had seen everything the transportation industry could offer, stepped forward. Director, we have a situation involving the improper detention attempt of federal agents traveling with classified materials. Secret Service has intervened directly. Rivera's expression tightened. Where are the passengers now boarded, ma'am? With Secret Service escort. And the officer involved. Bennett nodded toward Wilson, who stood apart from his colleagues Rodriguez and Bennett, having distanced themselves both physically and symbolically from his actions. Rivera assessed Wilson with a quick, practiced glance, noting his defensive posture, the wet stain on his uniform pants, the rigid set of his jaw. 22 years of managing airport personnel had taught her to read the signs of an employee in crisis, and Gregory Wilson was displaying all of them. Officer Wilson, she said, approaching him directly. I need you to report to my office immediately. Officer Rodriguez will escort you. Wilson opened his mouth as if to protest, then closed it, nodding stiffly. As they departed, Rivera turned to the gate agent. Sarah, I need the manifest for this flight and contact information for all first-class passengers. They're witnesses we may need to reach. Yes. Director Sarah replied, fingers already flying over her keyboard. Rivera then addressed the lingering crowd, her voice carrying the practiced calm of someone accustomed to managing public perception during crises. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your travel experience. Atlanta International takes the proper treatment of all passengers very seriously. If you witnessed the incident and are willing to share your perspective, airport staff will be available to take your statements. As the crowd dispersed, some still filming, others discussing what they'd seen in hushed voices, Rivera turned to Bennett. How bad is this? Jackson Bennett's expression was grave. The male passenger showed federal credentials that Wilson ignored, attempted handcuffing without cause, multiple witnesses, multiple recordings, and now Secret Service direct intervention. It's bad, Catherine. Rivera closed her eyes briefly. Do we know who they are? Beyond federal agents, Doctor. Zara Thomas is a neurosurgeon, leading researcher at Atlanta Memorial. Her husband, Marcus Thomas, works in cybersecurity with diplomatic clearance, both highly respected professionals. Black professionals, Rivera added quietly. Yes. The unspoken implication hung between them that race had almost certainly been a factor in Wilson's decision to single out the Thomases for additional screening despite their first-class status and impeccable credentials. Rivera's phone buzzed with an incoming call. This is PR already. I need to get ahead of this. Have Wilson in my office in 10 minutes and get me everything you can on the Thomases. We need to understand exactly who was mistreated in our terminal today. As Rivera answered her phone, striding toward the administrative offices, the plane carrying Marcus and Zara Thomas pushed back from the gate. Inside, the couple sat in the relative privacy of 2A and 2B, Agent Foster occupying 2C beside them, her colleagues in the row behind. "The Director of Diplomatic Security has been notified," Foster informed them quietly. "He sends his apologies and assurances that this will be addressed at the highest levels." Marcus nodded, his expression controlled, but the tension evident in the set of his shoulders. Zara reached over, laying her hand atop his on the armrest, a small gesture that conveyed volumes between them. "This isn't the first time," she said to Foster. "But it is the first time we've had Secret Service intervention." Foster's expression softened slightly. "I wish I could say I was surprised by what happened, but we both know this isn't about credentials or boarding passes." The cabin crew began their safety demonstration, the routine announcements creating a surreal backdrop to the extraordinary situation. Passengers further back in the cabin craned their necks trying to glimpse the couple who had been at the center of the confrontation at the gate. "What happens now?" Marcus asked once the demonstration had concluded and the plane had begun its taxi toward the runway. "Officially," Foster replied, "an investigation will be launched. Officer Wilson will likely face disciplinary action. The airport will issue a formal apology and probably offer some form of compensation." "And unofficially," Zara prompted. Foster's expression turned grimmer. "Unofficially, the videos are already circulating. Your names will become public. This will become a conversation about race and authority and who gets questioned in public spaces." Marcus and Zara exchanged a look, the weight of accidental symbolism settling over them. They had never sought to become the faces of yet another incident of racial profiling. They had careers, research patience, and responsibilities that required their focus. Yet here they were thrust into a spotlight they hadn't asked for but couldn't ethically shirk. "Your materials are secure," Foster added, nodding toward Marcus's laptop bag. "That's the primary concern from an operational perspective. The neural interface data will reach its destination on schedule." "And what about the other primary concern?" Zara asked quietly. "The fact that a federal agent was nearly handcuffed because of racial profiling. Will that reach its proper destination too?" Foster held her gaze. "That depends on what you decide to do next. The agency will support whatever approach you choose to take." As the plane accelerated down the runway, the Thomases sat in thoughtful silence, the weight of decision pressing upon them. They could accept the inevitable apologies the private resolution offers the institutional promises of reviewing procedures. They could focus on their professional obligations and try to put this incident behind them. Or they could use their positions, their credentials, their articulate voices to ensure that what happened at Gate D34 led to substantive change, not just for travelers who carried federal identification, but for everyone who had ever been stopped, questioned, or detained simply for existing in spaces where others assumed they didn't belong. Back at the airport, Director Rivera sat across from a visibly agitated Officer Wilson in her glass-walled office overlooking the main terminal. "Explain to me," she said, her voice measured but stern, "why you singled out Dr. and Mr. Thomas for additional screening when they had presented valid identification and boarding passes." Wilson shifted in his seat. "They matched a behavioral profile for what?" "Behavioral profile specifically," Rivera interrupted. "Please cite the exact criteria." Wilson hesitated. "There were multiple factors. Their movement patterns in the terminal, their interaction with the gate agent." Officer Wilson Rivera said, leaning forward. "I've reviewed the security footage from the past hour. The Thomases proceeded directly from the main concourse to their gate. They purchased coffee at an airport vendor. They presented their boarding passes when first-class boarding was announced. At what point did their behavior trigger security concerns?" Wilson's jaw tightened. "Director, with all due respect, security assessment involves intuition developed through years of experience. Sometimes you just know when something doesn't seem right." The words hung in the air between them, their implication unmistakable. Rivera regarded him steadily, allowing the silence to stretch uncomfortably. What didn't seem right? Officer Wilson. Their presence in the first-class boarding line, the contrast between their professional appearance and your assumptions about who belongs in premium cabins. Wilson flushed. That's not what The problem, Rivera continued, is that your intuition nearly resulted in the handcuffing of federal agents transporting sensitive materials. Your intuition has exposed this airport to potential legal action and certainly to public relations damage. And most concerning, your intuition appears to have been influenced by factors that have no place in professional security assessment. Wilson's expression hardened. I was doing my job. No, Rivera countered firmly. You were exceeding your authority based on biases that compromised your judgment, and now we all face the consequences of that lapse. She slid a document across the desk. You are suspended pending a full investigation. Your credentials and equipment will be surrendered immediately. The union has been notified of the action and your right to representation during the investigation process. Wilson stared at the document, the reality of his situation finally penetrating. This is my career, he said, his voice suddenly hollow. 22 years. Rivera's expression remained firm, but not without compassion. 22 years during which you should have learned that true security comes from observation, communication, and appropriate response, not from assumptions about who belongs where. As Wilson was escorted from her office by HR representatives, Rivera turned to the window overlooking the airfield, where planes took off and landed in carefully orchestrated patterns. Somewhere over Georgia, the Thomases were flying toward Washington, D.C., unaware that their 9 minutes at Gate D34 had already set in motion changes that would ripple through Atlanta International and beyond. Rivera's assistant appeared at the door. Director, I have the PR team assembled in the conference room, and there's something you should see. She handed Rivera a tablet displaying a social media feed. A video of the confrontation had already garnered over 50,000 views in less than an hour. The comments section was filling with similar stories from other travelers' accounts of being questioned, detained, or removed from flights for reasons that seemed to have more to do with appearance than behavior. It's happening across all platforms, her assistant explained. People are using hashtags like flying while black and hashtag Gate 34. The Thomases' names haven't been officially released, but people are already identifying them in the comments. Rivera nodded grimly. Tell PR I'll be there in 5 minutes, and get me contact information for Atlanta Memorial Hospital's administrative office. We need to reach Dr. Thomas through official channels before this gets any bigger. But even as she prepared to manage the institutional response, Rivera understood that some moments transcended standard crisis protocols. What had happened at Gate D34 wasn't just a security incident or a PR challenge. It was a mirror reflecting uncomfortable truths about who moved through public spaces with ease and who faced constant scrutiny. As a Hispanic woman who had risen through the ranks of airport administration, Rivera was no stranger to these dynamics. She had simply hoped that the institution she led could do better. Now that hope would need to transform into concrete action if Atlanta International was to emerge from this incident with both its reputation and its integrity intact. The wheels of Delta Flight 1972 touched down at Reagan National Airport at precisely 11:42 a.m., the plane taxiing smoothly toward its designated gate. For most passengers, arrival marked the simple transition from air travel to their Washington, D.C. destinations. For Marcus and Zara Thomas, it represented the intersection of professional obligation and unexpected symbolism, a role they had never sought, but now could not avoid. As the seatbelt sign chimed off, Agent Foster leaned toward them. We have a secure vehicle waiting. The materials will be transferred directly to the research facility. Dr. Thomas, do you still plan to attend the National Medical Association Gala tonight? Zara nodded, her expression resolute. My keynote address is scheduled for 7 p.m. I won't allow this morning's incident to interfere with that commitment. Understood, Foster replied. We'll ensure you both reach your hotel safely. The agency has also assigned additional personnel to monitor the social media situation. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Social media situation? Foster hesitated before pulling out her secure phone and displaying a news alert. The videos from Gate D34 have gone viral. Multiple recordings from different angles. Over 200,000 views in the past 2 hours. Zara closed her eyes, briefly absorbing this new reality. When she opened them, her gaze was steady. Have they identified us by name? Not officially, but it's happening in the comments. Your positions at Atlanta Memorial and in federal service have been mentioned. I'm sorry, but your privacy has been compromised. The implications settled over them as they disembarked, moving through the terminal with the Secret Service agents forming a discreet perimeter. Unlike the confrontation at Gate D34, their passage through Reagan National attracted no official scrutiny. Only curious glances from travelers who might have recognized them from the rapidly circulating videos. In the secure vehicle headed toward downtown D.C., Zara's phone buzzed with incoming messages. Colleagues from the hospital, fellow researchers, friends who had recognized them in the videos. Each notification represented another ripple spreading outward from those 9 minutes in Atlanta. The hospital PR team wants to know if I'll be issuing a statement, she said quietly, scrolling through her emails. The conference organizers have concerns about media presence at tonight's event. My research coordinator is fielding calls from journalists. Marcus reached for her hand. What do you want to do? It was the question that had hung between them since boarding the flight. A question with no easy answer. Their professional instincts urged caution, privacy, a focus on the work that had brought them to Washington. But their personal experiences, the lifetime of similar, if less dramatic encounters, pushed toward a different response. I need to speak with Dr. Richardson, Zara decided, referring to the president of the National Medical Association, who had invited her to deliver the keynote. If I'm going to address this, it should be in a context that connects to the larger issues of equity I was already planning to discuss. Marcus nodded. I'll contact Director Hawkins as well. The agency should be prepared if you decide to go public with this. The car moved smoothly through downtown Washington, the iconic landmarks of American governance sliding past the tinted windows, the Capitol Dome, the Washington Monument, the White House in the distance. Symbols of a democracy that promised equal protection, equal dignity, equal belonging to all its citizens. Promises that had been visibly broken at Gate D34. By the time they reached their hotel, the decision had solidified between them, not through explicit discussion, but through the unspoken understanding that had characterized their relationship from its beginning. They would not retreat from this unexpected spotlight. They would use it to illuminate the shadows where bias operated unchecked. In their suite, Zara spread out her original speech notes on the desk, studying the carefully crafted arguments about neurological research equity and medical access disparities. Good points, important points, but suddenly insufficient for the moment in which she found herself. I need to rewrite this, she said more to herself than to Marcus. Not completely, but significantly. Marcus, who had been on a secure call with his director, ended the conversation and turned to her. The agency is supportive of whatever approach you choose to take. Director Hawkins sends his personal apologies for the incident and has authorized me to share non-classified details if you decide to address it publicly. Zara looked up from her notes, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. That's unusually flexible for a security agency. Marcus's expression was grim. They're concerned about the optics of a black federal agent being profiled and nearly detained while on official business. It undermines confidence in the entire security apparatus. So it's not about the inherent wrongness of racial profiling, Zara noted. It's about institutional reputation. For some, yes, Marcus acknowledged. But Director Hawkins was genuinely disturbed. He's authorizing an internal review of how agents of color are treated during domestic travel. Zara nodded, turning back to her notes. Small steps. For the next several hours, they worked in companionable focus. Zara revising her speech, Marcus coordinating with both Secret Service and his home agency, both of them occasionally checking the still exploding social media response to the Gate D34 videos. By late afternoon, Zara had transformed her original presentation into something that honored her planned medical equity focus while addressing the elephant that would now be in every room she entered. Rather than avoiding mention of the morning's incident, she would use it as a powerful entry point to her larger argument about who receives proper attention, proper care, proper dignity in American systems, whether at airport gates or in emergency rooms. As she dressed for the gala, a floor-length gown in deep purple with architectural lines that spoke to her modernist aesthetic, Zara studied her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was simultaneously the child whose parents had taught her to excel despite barriers, the medical student who had pushed through isolation and skepticism, the surgeon who commanded operating rooms, and now, unexpectedly, a symbol of resistance to everyday indignities. "Ready?" Marcus asked, adjusting his bow tie as he joined her before the mirror. "As I'll ever be," she replied, reaching for his hand. "Remember what your grandmother used to say?" Marcus smiled. "Walk in this world like you belong in every room." "Every gate, every cabin, every conference hall," Zara added. "No matter who questions your presence." The ballroom of the Westfield Hotel glittered with chandeliers and professional accomplishment. Over 500 physicians, researchers, hospital administrators, and health policy experts had gathered for the National Medical Association's annual gala, a celebration of excellence in medicine, with particular focus on contributions from Black medical professionals. Under normal circumstances, Dr. Zara Thomas's keynote would have been noteworthy primarily for its scientific content, her groundbreaking work on neural pathway regeneration, and her advocacy for inclusive research methodologies. But as she entered the ballroom alongside Marcus, the subtle shift in atmosphere was unmistakable. Conversations paused, heads turned, recognition dawned on face after face. Dr. William Richardson, president of the NMA, approached them immediately, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. "Dr. Thomas, Mr. Thomas," he greeted them warmly, clasping their hands in turn. "I can't express how sorry I am about what happened this morning. Are you certain you still want to deliver the address tonight? We would completely understand if you preferred to postpone." Zara shook her head. "Thank you, Dr. Richardson, but I believe tonight's platform has become even more important in light of today's events." Richardson nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his distinguished features. At 68, he had navigated his own path through the medical establishment's racial barriers, becoming one of the first Black cardiologists at Massachusetts General Hospital before eventually leading the NMA's efforts to address health disparities nationwide. "The program begins in 30 minutes, he informed them. "Security has been enhanced due to increased media interest. If there's anything you need, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." As Richardson moved away to greet other arriving guests, Marcus and Zara made their way through the ballroom, accepting expressions of support from colleagues and carefully deflecting the more intrusive questions about the morning's confrontation. Despite the circumstances, Zara maintained her professional focus. This was still a gathering of medical leaders whose support would be crucial for her research initiatives. At precisely 7 p.m., the program began. After opening remarks and recognition of distinguished attendees, Dr. Richardson approached the podium. "Tonight's keynote speaker needs little introduction to this audience," he began. "Dr. Zara Thomas is one of the most innovative neurosurgeons of her generation. Her research on neural pathway regeneration has transformed recovery prospects for traumatic brain injury patients. Her commitment to inclusive clinical trials has revealed critical treatment variations across diverse populations that had been previously overlooked. He paused, his expression growing more solemn. Many of you may have seen the disturbing videos circulating today showing Dr. Thomas and her husband experiencing unwarranted detention at Atlanta International Airport. While we had invited Dr. Thomas months ago to speak about her groundbreaking medical work, her presence tonight carries additional significance. She embodies not only scientific excellence, but the resilience required to achieve that excellence in a world that too often questions where we belong. A ripple of knowing affirmation passed through the predominantly black audience, a collective recognition of shared experiences, if rarely as public or dramatic as what had occurred at Gate D34. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Zara Thomas. The applause was thunderous, not merely polite professional acknowledgement, but an outpouring of solidarity and support. As Zara rose from her seat and moved toward the podium, she felt the weight of the moment. This was no longer simply a speech about medical research. It was a declaration of belonging, of value, of right to occupy space without justification. She placed her notes on the podium, surveyed the room of colleagues and peers, and began. Thank you, Dr. Richardson, for that kind introduction. And thank you to everyone here tonight for your support, both of my research and in light of this morning's events. She paused, her gaze steady as it moved across the attentive faces before her. I had prepared a speech about neural pathway regeneration, about how the brain creates new connections after injury, about how these pathways differ across genetic backgrounds, about why inclusive research methodologies matter for equitable treatment outcomes. Another pause. Those remain critical topics that I will address tonight. But I would be ignoring the elephant in the room if I didn't first acknowledge what many of you have already seen online, the incident at Atlanta International Airport, where my husband and I were singled out for additional screening, despite valid identification, questioned about our presence in the first-class boarding area, and nearly detained until Secret Service agents intervened. Murmurs of sympathy and outrage rippled through the audience. I share this not to center myself or to seek sympathy, but because what happened at Gate D34 is directly relevant to the medical equity issues I've spent my career addressing. Because the same assumptions that led an airport security officer to question our presence in first class are reflected in the medical disparities that plague our healthcare system. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate, as she moved from personal experience to professional expertise. When a black patient presenting with chest pain is sent home with anxiety medication, while a white patient with identical symptoms gets an immediate ECG, that's a blockage in the diagnostic pathway. Nods of recognition spread through the audience. When diverse candidates aren't recruited for clinical trials, despite the known variances in treatment responses across different genetic backgrounds, that's a blockage in the research pathway. More nods, more murmurs of agreement. When medical schools continue to teach that black patients have higher pain thresholds, perpetuating a myth born in the darkest chapters of medical history, that's a blockage in the educational pathway. The ballroom had fallen completely silent, every eye fixed on Zara as she connected her personal experience to the broader issues facing their profession. What happened to me today at the airport isn't separate from what happens in our hospitals. It's part of the same continuum where certain people are presumed not to belong in certain spaces, whether that's a first-class cabin or a cardiac care unit. She returned to the podium and lifted a small metal object, a stethoscope. This instrument allows us to hear what's happening beneath the surface. Tonight, I'm asking all of you to use your metaphorical stethoscopes to listen deeply to what's happening in your institutions, your practices, your operating rooms, to hear the murmurs of inequality that might otherwise go undiagnosed. With that powerful metaphor established, Zara transitioned smoothly into the scientific portion of her address. The groundbreaking research on neural pathways, the innovative surgical techniques, the inclusive clinical trial methodologies that had revealed critical treatment differences across populations. But now these scientific achievements were framed within a larger context, a demonstration of excellence despite barriers an insistence on belonging in spaces from airport gates to operating rooms, a refusal to accept the artificial constraints of lowered expectations or institutional bias. As she concluded her address, Zara returned to the morning's incident one final time. This morning at Gate D34, an officer looked at my husband and me and decided we didn't belong in first class. He couldn't see our credentials, our accomplishments, our humanity. He saw only what his assumptions told him to see. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. In medicine, we have a term for when preconceived notions prevent accurate assessment diagnostic error. And just like medical diagnostic errors, social diagnostic errors can have life-altering consequences. Her voice softened, becoming more intimate, despite the large audience. Each of us in this room has experienced moments when others have failed to diagnose our full humanity, our rightful belonging. But we are here tonight as living proof of what happens when we refuse to accept those misdiagnoses, when we insist on being seen accurately, completely respectfully. She lifted her glass in a toast. To correct diagnosis in medicine and in society. May we create a world where everyone receives both. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes, a powerful affirmation not just of Zara's scientific contributions, but of her courage in transforming a humiliating public incident into a platform for addressing deeper inequities. As she returned to her seat beside Marcus, the weight of the day's events finally registered in her tired eyes and slightly trembling hands. What had begun as a routine business trip had transformed into something neither of them had anticipated, a public role thrust upon them by 9 minutes at an airport gate. What they couldn't know then, as Marcus squeezed her hand in silent support and colleagues approached to offer congratulations and solidarity, was that their ordeal at Gate D34 was about to catalyze changes far beyond their individual experience, changes that would eventually transform policies, practices, and possibilities for countless travelers after them. The speech had been delivered, the neural interface data had reached its destination, their professional obligations had been fulfilled. But the journey that had begun with those fateful words, "I need you to step aside now. You don't match the profile of someone who belongs in this boarding area," was just beginning. The day after Zara's keynote address, the videos from Gate D34 reached 10 million views across platforms. News organizations picked up the story, their headlines capturing the dramatic power shift: Secret Service intervenes as black federal agent, nearly handcuffed at airport gate, and renowned neurosurgeon profiled while boarding first class. This happens every day. In their hotel suite, Marcus and Zara sat surrounded by news alerts, message notifications, and emails that poured in at a rate impossible to process individually. What had begun as a personal experience had exploded into a national conversation, each new comment, each shared story, adding to a collective documentation of similar incidents across the country. "The hospital board wants me to appear on Good Morning America," Zara said, scanning an email from Atlanta Memorial's PR director. "They're positioning it as an opportunity to highlight both the incident and our neural pathway research." Marcus looked up from his secure tablet, where he was reviewing the official incident report filed by Agent Foster. The agency is supportive of public engagement, but wants security review of any statements regarding the classified materials. They exchanged a look that acknowledged their strange new reality, their professional lives continuing alongside their unexpected role as the faces of a viral story about racial profiling in public spaces. Zara set down her phone, rubbing her temples against the beginning of a tension headache. "This isn't what I expected to be doing in Washington." "I know," Marcus replied quietly. "But maybe it's what we need to be doing." Before Zara could respond, her phone rang an unfamiliar DC area code. She answered cautiously, putting it on speaker. "Dr. Thomas, this is Isabella Martinez, Executive Vice President of Passenger Experience at United Airlines. I hope I'm not intruding." Zara raised an eyebrow at Marcus, who shrugged in equal surprise. Not at all, Ms. Martinez. How can I help you? Actually, Martinez replied, her voice carrying both professional polish and genuine emotion. I'm calling to see how I might help you. I watched what happened at Gate D34, what happened to you and your husband, and I felt… Professionally devastated isn't a strong enough term. There was a pause, as if Martinez was carefully choosing her next words. As one of the few Hispanic women in airline executive leadership, I've spent my career trying to improve passenger experiences for everyone. What I witnessed in that video represents the absolute failure of those efforts. Marcus leaned forward. We appreciate your concern, Ms. Martinez, but what exactly are you proposing? A meeting, Martinez replied promptly. Today, if possible. I'm not calling with empty apologies or PR gestures. I believe this incident, painful as it was, creates an opportunity for meaningful reform in how airlines and airports approach passenger screening staff, training, and incident response. Zara and Marcus exchanged another look. Skepticism balanced against potential opportunity. We're listening, Zara said carefully. The transportation industry has been talking about bias training and equity initiatives for years, Martinez continued. But talking hasn't translated to consistent change in passenger experiences. What if we used this moment to create something more substantial? A formal initiative with measurable outcomes, transparent reporting, and accountability mechanisms. The proposal hung in the air between them. It was unexpected, potentially significant, and if genuine, aligned with the impact they had privately discussed wanting to create from this incident. Why us? Marcus asked directly. There have been countless similar incidents, many recorded, many involving passengers without our credentials or public platform. Because you have both, Martinez answered honestly. The federal credentials that make this incident impossible to dismiss as standard security procedure. The medical expertise to frame this as a public health equity issue. The communication skills to articulate what needs to change. And now the public attention that creates pressure for institutional response. Her voice softened slightly. I'm not asking you to carry this burden alone. I'm offering to put institutional resources behind your lived experience to create change that should have happened years ago. After arranging to meet Martinez later that day, Zara and Marcus turned to each other. The implications of this unexpected alliance taking shape between them. This could be significant, Marcus observed. Martinez has actual operational authority at a major airline. Zara nodded slowly. Or it could be a sophisticated PR strategy to get ahead of the story. Either way, Marcus replied, it gives us leverage we didn't have yesterday. By noon, their hotel suite had transformed into an impromptu strategic headquarters. In addition to Isabella Martinez, who arrived punctually at 1 p.m., they had contacted key allies from their respective professional networks, Dr. William Richardson from the NMA, 2 civil rights attorneys, Marcus knew from Howard University, and Agent Foster, who attended in both official and supportive capacities. Martinez arrived not with a PR team, as they had half expected, but with a comprehensive folder of internal airline data. Incident reports, complaint patterns, demographic analyses of passengers selected for additional screening. This is everything we've been collecting but failing to adequately address, she explained, spreading the documents across the conference table. The patterns are undeniable when viewed comprehensively. As the group reviewed the data, the outline of what would eventually become the Thomas Transportation Equity Initiative began to take shape. Not simply a response to one incident, but a framework for addressing the persistent patterns revealed in both the data and the thousands of personal accounts now flooding social media under hashtags like #Gate 34 and #FlyingWhileBlack. What if we created a 9-minute protocol, Zara suggested, referencing the critical time frame from their own experience. a standardized approach for security personnel to self-check biased assumptions before escalating situations. The idea resonated immediately. 9 minutes not as an arbitrary time limit, but as a structured framework for assessment communication, verification, and de-escalation. Before security situations crossed irreversible thresholds. It could extend beyond airports, one of the civil rights attorneys noted. The same principles could apply to retail security, campus police, even traffic stops. Martinez nodded enthusiastically. We could develop training modules, assessment metrics, reporting mechanisms. United would commit to pilot implementation and transparent outcome reporting. As the afternoon progressed, the initiative expanded beyond its initial concept. They identified key components, data collection and analysis, staff training, passenger reporting systems, independent oversight, and public transparency requirements. What had begun as a response to personal humiliation was evolving into a comprehensive approach to transportation equity. We need to address Officer Wilson's fate, Marcus said, raising a point that had been overshadowed by the broader planning. I don't want this initiative to be built on one person losing their job when the real issues are institutional. This sparked intense discussion. Some argued that Wilson's actions clearly warranted termination. Others suggested that using him as a scapegoat would allow the system to avoid deeper accountability. What if Zara proposed we recommend that Wilson's case be used as a case study in the training program, not to humiliate him, but to identify the specific decision points where bias influenced assessment and where intervention could have created different outcomes? The group considered this approach accountability without simple punishment, education rather than mere example-making. It aligned with the initiative's larger goals of transformation rather than mere reaction. By evening, they had drafted the framework document for the Thomas Transportation Equity Initiative, with United Airlines as its first corporate partner and the National Medical Association providing institutional backing. What had happened at Gate D34 was being channeled into something constructive, a response that honored the anger and hurt of the experience, while creating mechanisms for preventing similar incidents in the future. As the meeting concluded and their allies departed with assigned next steps, Marcus and Zara found themselves alone again in the suite, the day's work spread across every surface. "Are we really doing this?" Zara asked quietly. "Creating an entire initiative because one officer couldn't see us as belonging in first class." Marcus moved to the window, looking out at the Washington skyline now lit against the evening sky. "Not because of one officer," he corrected gently. "Because of all the officers Wilson who came before him, all those who will come after him, and all the travelers who don't have Secret Service agents to intervene when they're wrongly targeted." Zara joined him at the window, leaning against his shoulder. "Our parents always said education was the way forward, that our credentials would protect us. But they didn't? Not really. Not alone." Marcus agreed. "But combined with this platform we didn't ask for, maybe they can protect others." The next morning brought news from Atlanta. Officer Gregory Wilson had been suspended pending investigation, with Airport Director Catherine Rivera issuing a public statement acknowledging the serious breach of protocol and public trust that had occurred at Gate D34. More significantly, Rivera had requested a meeting with the Thomases upon their return to Atlanta, not for damage control or perfunctory apology, but to discuss potential partnership with the nascent Thomas Initiative for implementing reforms at Hartsfield-Jackson International. "This is moving faster than I expected," Zara commented, as they prepared for a day of meetings with potential stakeholders for the initiative. Marcus nodded, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "That's the power of those videos. They created undeniability, the kind that forces institutional response." Over the following days, as they balanced their original professional obligations with the rapidly expanding initiative, the momentum continued to build. Transportation Secretary Davis issued a statement calling for a comprehensive review of airport screening practices nationwide. 3 additional major airlines requested information about participating in the initiative. Civil rights organizations offered partnership for data collection and analysis. A week after the incident at Gate D34, as they finally prepared to return to Atlanta, Marcus received a secure communication from Director Hawkins. The agency was implementing immediate changes to protocols for agents of color traveling with sensitive materials, creating specialized verification procedures that maintained security while reducing vulnerability to profiling. Small steps. Marcus echoed Zara's earlier assessment, showing her the directive. But steps nonetheless, she replied, recognizing progress, even as they both acknowledged how much work remained. Their return to Atlanta carried symbolic weight beyond their personal journey home. Gate D34 had been transformed from an anonymous airport location to a nationally recognized site of confrontation and eventual transformation. As their plane descended toward Hartsfield-Jackson International, both found themselves wondering how the space would feel, now weighted with new significance. Airport Director Rivera met them personally at the arrival gate, accompanied not by a PR team, but by Security Chief Bennett and a woman they didn't recognize. Dr. and Mr. Thomas Rivera greeted them professional but warm. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. This is Captain Eleanor Ramirez, who has been appointed to lead our new passenger equity division, a direct response to what occurred during your departure." Ramirez, a Hispanic woman in her late 40s with a direct gaze and confident posture, extended her hand. "I've reviewed your initiative framework. It aligns significantly with the reforms I've been advocating for within our security operations for years. I believe we have a unique opportunity here." As they walked through the terminal toward the administrative offices, Zara noticed the sidelong glances from airport staff and travelers who recognized them from the viral videos. Their experience had become public property, in a way a reference point for discussions about belonging, authority, and dignity in public spaces. In Rivera's office, the conversation quickly moved from apologies to action. The airport administration had already begun implementing changes, revised training protocols, incident documentation requirements, oversight mechanisms for passenger complaints. They wanted the Thomas Initiative involved not just for endorsement, but for substantive guidance. "We're committed to ensuring that what happened at Gate D34 leads to meaningful change," Rivera emphasized. "Not just procedural adjustments, but a fundamental shift in how we approach passenger dignity across all our operations." As the meeting progressed, it became clear that the initiative they had conceived in their Washington hotel room was rapidly evolving into something with real institutional backing, a framework for reform that could potentially transform passenger experiences across the transportation sector. What they couldn't have anticipated was how their personal ordeal would catalyze changes already brewing beneath the surface, giving voice and momentum to reform efforts that had previously struggled for attention and resources. In the weeks that followed, as they resumed their professional lives while building the initiative's infrastructure, Marcus and Zara witnessed the expanding impact of those 9 minutes at Gate D34. Not just in policy documents or press releases, but in the stories that continued to reach them from travelers who had experienced similar treatment from transportation, employees who had witnessed such incidents from security personnel who wanted better approaches. The incident had created an opening, a moment when institutional denial gave way to acknowledgement, when personal humiliation transformed into collective action, when 9 minutes of discrimination launched what would eventually become years of reform. 6 months after the incident, Officer Gregory Wilson participated in a facilitated dialogue with the Thomases, not as a media spectacle or punishment ritual, but as part of the case study approach they had proposed for the initiative's training program. The conversation was difficult, revealing, and ultimately constructive. Focusing not on Wilson as an individual villain, but on the institutional contexts and implicit biases that had shaped his actions that day. I believed I was following protocol, he acknowledged, during the recorded session that would later be used in training materials. But I wasn't questioning where that protocol came from or who it was designed to protect. It wasn't a perfect resolution. No single conversation could erase the harm done or completely transform entrenched patterns of behavior. But it represented something essential to the initiative's approach, the understanding that lasting change required education rather than simply punishment transformation, rather than mere retribution. 1 year after the incident, the Thomas Transportation Equity Initiative had partner agreements with 12 major airlines' implementation programs at 23 airports nationwide and preliminary data showing a 37% reduction in biased incident reports at participating locations. What had begun with an officer's command, "I need you to step aside now. You don't match the profile of someone who belongs in this boarding area," had evolved into a movement changing not just who belonged in transportation spaces, but how that belonging was recognized, respected, and protected. The 9 minutes that had transformed the Thomases' lives had begun to transform the transportation landscape as well, not erasing the reality of bias, but creating more effective tools for addressing it when it occurred, and preventing it where possible. Small steps, as Zara had noted, but steps in the direction of the world they wanted to help create. 2 years after the incident at Gate D34, the Thomas Transportation Equity Initiative occupied a modest but elegant office space in downtown Atlanta. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the reception area with natural light, illuminating walls adorned with framed data visualizations. Graphs showing declining incident rates, maps indicating partner locations, testimonials from travelers whose experiences had been transformed by the initiative's work. Marcus sat at the conference table in the main meeting room reviewing quarterly impact reports with his team. At 38, he had maintained his role in federal cybersecurity while devoting significant time to the initiative, finding unexpected synergies between his security expertise and the challenge of creating more equitable transportation systems. The implementation at O'Hare is showing promising early results, noted Jamila Washington, their data analytics director. Complaint rates down 42% in the first 6 months, with improved resolution metrics for the complaints that were filed. Marcus nodded, studying the detailed breakdown on his tablet. "And the staff feedback?" "Generally positive," Jamila replied. The 9-minute protocol is being described as clarifying rather than restrictive. Security personnel appreciate having structured assessment guidelines rather than relying solely on intuition or vague behavioral indicators. This had been one of the initiative's most significant insights, that many security officers actually welcomed clearer guidelines that reduced reliance on subjective judgment. The protocol's emphasis on observable behaviors rather than demographic assumptions provided a framework that improved security effectiveness while reducing discriminatory impacts. "What about the Denver implementation?" Marcus asked. "They were having challenges with supervisor buy-in." Improving, Jamila confirmed. "The peer testimonial approach is helping. Having supervisors from Atlanta and Chicago share their experiences has been more effective than theoretical arguments." As they continued reviewing data from implementations across the country, Zara entered the conference room, having just completed a delicate neurosurgery at Atlanta Memorial. At 36, she had maintained her surgical practice and research leadership, while serving as the initiative's co-director and public spokesperson. "Sorry I'm late," she said, taking a seat beside Marcus. "Complicated hemorrhage case." "Patient stable." Marcus asked the question automatic between them, this balance of their professional lives alongside their advocacy work. "Stable and responding well," Zara confirmed before turning to the data projected on the screen. "I see Denver's numbers are improving." The easy transition between brain surgery and transportation equity metrics exemplified how they had integrated these parallel paths over the past 2 years, neither abandoning their original callings nor shying away from the unexpected platform they had been given. The initiative had grown beyond their initial conception, expanding from its focus on airport security to address equity issues across transportation modes, from airline boarding practices to ride-share driver biases, from TSA screening procedures to train conductor interactions. What united these seemingly disparate areas was the consistent pattern of who moved through transportation spaces with ease and who faced additional scrutiny. Their approach had evolved as well. Rather than positioning the initiative primarily as a response to discrimination, they had framed it around diagnostic justice. Zara's medical metaphor expanded into a comprehensive methodology for identifying, analyzing, and addressing inequitable patterns in transportation systems. The comparison data from partner and non-partner airports is particularly compelling, Jamila noted, bringing up a new slide. We're seeing statistically significant differences in incident rates, passenger satisfaction metrics, and even operational efficiency measures. This last point had been crucial for securing industry participation, demonstrating that equitable practices weren't just morally right, but operationally beneficial. Fewer false positive security stops meant more efficient processing. Better trained staff meant fewer escalated conflicts. More consistent application of rules meant reduced liability exposure. The Transportation Secretary wants to reference these results in next week's congressional testimony, Marcus informed the team, particularly the economic impact analysis showing reduced complaint processing costs and liability expenses. As the meeting concluded and team members dispersed to their respective projects, Marcus and Zara remained at the conference table, taking a rare moment of quiet reflection. "Did you ever imagine we'd be here?" Zara asked, gesturing to the office around them, the physical manifestation of what had grown from their ordeal. Marcus shook his head. "Not specifically this, but I think we always knew we'd use whatever platform we were given to create change." Zara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes I still feel that moment when Wilson put his hand on your wrist, when everything could have gone so differently if Agent Foster hadn't arrived." 9 minutes, Marcus said softly. 9 minutes that changed everything. Later that afternoon, they arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson International for a scheduled appearance that carried powerful symbolism. Airport Director Rivera had invited them to participate in the unveiling of the new training center for security personnel, a facility specifically designed to implement the 9-minute protocol and other equity-focused practices. As they approached the familiar terminal, memories of that day 2 years earlier surfaced inevitably. The same gleaming floors, the same bustling crowds, the same announcements echoing overhead. But the energy felt different now, not because bias had been eliminated, but because mechanisms for addressing it had been institutionalized. Security Chief Bennett greeted them at the administration entrance, his manner respectful, but not deferential. Over the past 2 years, he had become a valuable ally in implementing reforms, contributing his decades of security experts to ensure that equity initiatives enhanced, rather than compromised, safety protocols. "The training center is ready," he informed them as they walked through the terminal. "We've incorporated the simulation technology you recommended, allowing officers to experience scenarios from multiple perspectives before making intervention decisions. This had been one of the initiative's most innovative contributions, virtual reality modules that allowed security personnel to experience what it felt like to be unfairly targeted, to have their presence questioned, to face assumptions based on appearance rather than behavior. The empathy-building approach had proven surprisingly effective, particularly when combined with clear operational guidelines. As they approached Gate D34, yes, the same gate where it had all begun, they found it transformed. Not just physically, though new signage detailed passenger rights and feedback mechanisms, but symbolically. What had been the site of humiliation had become a landmark in the journey toward more equitable transportation spaces. Captain Elena Ramirez waited for them at the gate, now leading the airport's passenger equity division, a department that hadn't existed before their incident, but now employed 15 staff members dedicated to monitoring training and continuous improvement of passenger experiences. "We have a special guest waiting in the training center," Ramirez informed them with a slight smile. As they entered the newly established facility, adjacent to the main security area, they were surprised to see a familiar face, the young girl who had watched their confrontation 2 years earlier, now about 10 years old, accompanied by her mother. "This is Sophia Taylor Rivera," introduced them. She and her mother, Gabriela, were witnesses to the original incident. Sophia has since become one of our youth advisors for the Family Travel Equity Program. Sophia stepped forward, her expression serious, but her eyes bright with recognition. "I remember you," she said to Zara. "You told me I could be a doctor if I wanted to." Zara knelt to the girl's level, her professional composure softening into genuine warmth. "I remember you too. Are you still thinking about becoming a doctor?" Sophia nodded vigorously. "A neurosurgeon like you. Mom bought me books about the brain, and I did my science project on neurons." Gabriela Taylor placed a supportive hand on her daughter's shoulder. What Sophia saw that day, both the discrimination and your dignity in response to it, made a powerful impression. When we heard about the youth advisory program she insisted on applying, the moment crystallized something essential about their work, how witnessing injustice could either reinforce acceptance of the status quo or catalyze commitment to change. For young Sophia, watching Zara face discrimination had somehow strengthened rather than diminished her aspirations, showing her not just the reality of bias, but the possibility of standing against it. The formal ceremony that followed marked not just the opening of a training facility, but the institutionalization of principles that had emerged from personal humiliation. Director Rivera spoke about fundamental shifts in operational culture. Transportation Secretary Davis, attending, virtually highlighted the initiative's impact on national policy development. Captain Ramirez detailed the specific metrics they would track to ensure continuous improvement. But it was the informal interactions afterward that carried the deepest meaning. Security officers approaching Marcus and Zara, not with defensiveness, but with genuine questions about implementing the protocols. Airline staff sharing stories of how the training had changed their approach to passenger interactions. Travelers stopping to express gratitude for changes they had experienced. As the afternoon concluded and they prepared to depart, Marcus and Zara found themselves standing once again at Gate D34, this time not as passengers, but as catalysts for the transformation evident around them. "Full circle," Zara observed quietly. Marcus nodded his gaze, taking in the space that had changed their lives. "Not a circle," he corrected gently. "A spiral. We've come around to the same point, but at a different level." The observation captured something essential about their journey, how a moment of injustice had launched not just response, but evolution, not just reaction, but creation. The incident that began with an officer's command to step aside had ultimately created space for thousands of travelers to move forward with greater dignity and security. As they left the airport, Marcus reached for Zara's hand, a gesture that had carried them through countless challenges from medical school exams to congressional testimonies. The touch conveyed what words often couldn't, the partnership that had allowed them to transform 9 minutes of humiliation into years of impact. "Ready for whatever's next?" he asked, echoing the question they had asked each other since their earliest days together. Zara squeezed his hand in response. "Always." They stepped out into the Atlanta sunshine, moving forward together, as they had since that first coffee date at Howard University, two people who had never sought to become symbols, but who had embraced the responsibility when circumstances demanded it, who had used their professional expertise, their personal experience, and their public platform to address not just their own mistreatment, but the broader patterns it represented. What had happened at Gate D34 would always be part of their story. But it would no longer be defined by what was taken from them in those 9 minutes, their dignity, their belonging, their rightful place. Instead, it would be defined by what they had built in the years that followed, a framework for ensuring that others would face fewer such moments and more pathways to justice when they did. The evening sun cast long shadows through the windows of the Thomas Transportation Equity Initiative's executive office, as Marcus and Zara sat together reviewing the day's developments. On the table between them lay the final draft of their annual impact report, a comprehensive document detailing the organization's work over the past 2 years and its vision for the future. "I still can't quite believe how far this has come," Zara said. Turning pages that documented thousands of cases, supported dozens of policies, reformed and measurable improvements in transportation equity metrics across the country. Marcus nodded, his expression reflective. "From 9 minutes at a gate to all of this. It's not the path either of us would have chosen, but I can't argue with where it led." The office around them bore witness to that journey. Awards from civil rights organizations lined one wall, while another displayed framed letters from travelers whose experiences had been transformed by the initiative's work. A small shelf held a collection of more personal mementos, including a single pair of handcuffs mounted in a clear display case, a reminder of where it had all begun. "I was thinking about Wilson today," Zara admitted. "His parole hearing is next month." Marcus looked up, surprised. "Are you planning to attend?" She shook her head. "No, but I've been reflecting on what his actions set in motion. He thought he was stopping us from boarding a plane. What he really did was launch a movement. The observation captured something essential about their journey, how an attempt to diminish them had instead become the catalyst for expansion far beyond what either of them had imagined possible." "Do you remember that little girl at the gate?" Marcus asked. "Sophia, who kept watching you throughout the incident?" Zara nodded. "I think about her often. She must be about 11 now." She smiled. "I saw a family at the airport today that reminded me of her. A young black girl, maybe 9 or 10, walking through the first-class line with her parents. No one questioned them. No one gave them a second look. They just moved through the space like they belonged there, which of course they did." The observation hung between them, a small moment representing a larger shift. Not a complete transformation of society or an end to the biases that had shaped their experience, but a measurable change in one specific context where their work had made a difference. "That's what this has always been about," Zara said softly. "Not just responding to what happened to us, but ensuring it happens less often to others." Marcus reached for her hand across the table. "We still have so much work to do." "We do," she agreed. "But we're not doing it alone anymore." That was perhaps the most significant development of the past 2 years, the way their individual response to injustice had expanded into a collective movement involving thousands of travelers, hundreds of volunteers, dozens of partner organizations, and a growing cohort of institutional allies within the very systems they had once confronted. On the desk behind them sat a framed photograph taken at Gate D34 during their recent return visit. Unlike the images from 2 years earlier that captured their humiliation, this one showed them standing tall in the same space surrounded by the airport's new civil rights compliance team. A visual representation of how the site of their ordeal had been transformed into a place of progress. "We should head home," Zara said, checking her watch. "Early surgery tomorrow." As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Marcus paused at the doorway, looking back at the office that represented so much more than either of them had envisioned when they'd first considered establishing a small foundation in response to their experience. "You know what I'm most proud of?" he asked. "What's that?" "That we didn't just fight back. We built forward. Wilson tried to put us in our place. Instead, we created a new place entirely, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after us." Zara smiled, understanding completely. From 9 minutes to forever. The next time you walk through an airport terminal, glance around at your fellow travelers moving through security checkpoints, boarding gates, and priority lanes. Notice who gets questioned and who doesn't. Notice who moves through spaces with ease and who faces additional scrutiny. Notice who is assumed to belong and who must continuously prove their right to be there. What you're witnessing isn't random. It's the result of decisions, policies, and assumptions. Some explicit, some implicit, all consequential for those on the receiving end. When Marcus and Zara Thomas were stopped at Gate D34, they happened to have the protection of federal credentials and Secret Service intervention. Their humiliation lasted 9 minutes instead of hours or days. Their careers continued instead of being derailed. Their dignity was restored through external validation of their belonging. But what about everyone else? What about the travelers without Secret Service agents to intervene when their presence is questioned simply because of how they look? That's where you come in. In a world where phones are always present and documentation is always possible, the simple act of witnessing becomes its own form of intervention. Recording becomes accountability. Presence becomes protection. The next time you see someone treated unfairly because of how they look, whether at an airport gate, a hotel lobby, or any public space where belonging is policed and questioned, remember this: in that moment, you might be the only protection they have. And sometimes 9 minutes of dignity preserved can launch a lifetime of change. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to share these powerful real-life stories that shine a light on important issues affecting our communities every day. Share this video with friends and family who might need to hear this message, because change begins when we bear witness to truth together. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or similar experiences. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination in public spaces? How did you respond? Your voice matters in this conversation. Thank you for watching, and remember, small actions can create powerful ripples of change.